at 72 years old. Charlotte Thompson had earned every wrinkle on her face and every brick in her real estate empire. Raised during the post-war era in a modest town near Charleston, South Carolina, Charlotte had built her fortune with nothing but grit, intuition, and a talent for turning run-down properties into gems. Her late husband had passed a decade earlier, leaving her the sole guardian of both a thriving business and a once close-knit family. Charlotte lived alone in a beautiful Southern-style farmhouse just outside of Savannah. The wide porches and creaking wooden floors spoke of old memories, Sunday morning breakfasts, and grandkids running barefoot in the yard. She wasn't just wealthy, she was respected. But beyond her financial success, Charlotte carried something deeper, an unwavering belief that family always came first. Her daughter, Isabella, and son-in-law, Ryan, visited frequently, or so it seemed. In truth, they had begun showing up with increasing urgency, bringing with them smooth words and flashy presentations about crypto startups and AI-backed blockchain ventures. Though Charlotte listened politely, she remained cautious. Something didn't sit right, and beneath that quiet southern grace, a storm was brewing. Charlotte was sitting on her porch, swing one golden afternoon, sipping sweet tea and watching the oak trees sway in the summer breeze, when Isabella arrived unannounced. Her usual cheerful smile was absent. Ryan trailed behind her, carrying a sleek leather briefcase and a heavy air of impatience. "We need to talk, Mama," Isabella said, her voice strained. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about legacy. Your legacy." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, but gestured them inside. She had a feeling this visit wasn't about catching up. Once seated at the kitchen table, Ryan opened his briefcase with dramatic flair, laying out papers, contracts, and a glossy pitch deck. The idea was simple on the surface: a new tech startup that would revolutionize real estate through artificial intelligence and decentralized contracts. They needed $500. Ling. Charlotte examined the documents with the same sharp eye she used to scan foreclosure listings in her prime. "You too sure about this?" she asked. Isabella's tone shifted. "You're sitting on millions. What good is it if your own family can't benefit from it?" Charlotte felt the sting in her daughter's words, but kept her composure. "You want a loan, not a blessing. That's business. And business needs proof." Ryan's mask cracked slightly. "We thought you'd care more about supporting your own blood than acting like a cold investor." Isabella suddenly burst into tears. "You're choosing money over your daughter." Again. The word again hit Charlotte like a slap. She remembered all the birthdays she'd missed during her building years, all the late-night meetings that replaced bedtime stories. Guilt flickered, but so did resolve. "I made those sacrifices so you'd never have to ask for help like this," she said quietly. When Charlotte refused to sign the check that day, everything changed. Isabella stood up, face red with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Don't expect us to be around when you're too old to manage things." Charlotte was left alone at the table, heart pounding, not because of fear, but from the devastating realization that her daughter's love came with conditions. Later that night, someone spray-painted the words, "Selfish Witch," across her white picket fence. Her mailbox was smashed to pieces. The once peaceful sanctuary of her home was now tainted by betrayal. That was the moment Charlotte knew this wasn't just about money. It was about control, about manipulation, and about family turning into strangers right before her eyes. But what Isabella and Ryan didn't know was that Charlotte hadn't survived 7 decades just to be fooled by sweet words and guilt trips. She would fight, not just for her estate, but for her dignity, and she would not be fighting alone. 3 nights later, Charlotte attended a small birthday gathering hosted by her old friend Martha. It was meant to be a relaxing evening homemade pie, piano music, and friendly chatter from neighbors she'd known for over 40 years. Everyone hugged her warmly, but Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Isabella and Ryan had arrived early and insisted on bringing the cake. Charlotte was surprised they hadn't spoken since the blow-up days earlier, but Martha, unaware of the drama, welcomed them like family. Midway through the evening, Charlotte took a bite of the lemon chiffon cake Ryan had personally served her. Within minutes, she began to feel disoriented. Her thoughts clouded, and her balance weakened. The room started spinning. Her vision blurred as people's faces melted into shadows. The piano music sounded like echoes from underwater. Before she could collapse, a hand grabbed her arm, firm but careful. "Grandma, don't eat or drink anything else," whispered a voice in her ear. It was Tyler, her 9-year-old grandson, Isabella's only child. Tyler had returned from college for the summer and had been keeping a quiet distance from the family's tension. But tonight, his eyes were filled with urgency. He led Charlotte into the hallway, where he pulled out his phone and showed her photos he'd secretly taken from Isabella's laptop days before forged legal documents, email drafts about transferring guardianship, and references to medications that could simulate cognitive decline. "They're trying to make you sign over power of attorney," Tyler whispered, "and if that doesn't work, they want to declare you mentally incompetent." Charlotte's legs nearly gave out. The depth of the betrayal felt like a punch to the chest. "They planned this party as a cover," Tyler continued. "Ryan swapped your prescriptions. I overheard them. They think no one will question it if you start showing signs of confusion in public." Rage flared inside her, not just at the scheme, but at how meticulously her own daughter had plotted against her. How many months had they been planning this? Had they ever truly cared, or had it always been about the inheritance? Charlotte steadied herself. "Hear mine," despite the fog, sharpened with a clarity born from decades of survival. "You did good, Tyler," she said, gripping his hand. "Now we play their game. But on our terms." Together, they left the party quietly. No drama, no confrontation, just a quiet exit. But what Isabella and Ryan didn't know was that the battle had just begun. Charlotte would call her lawyer at dawn. She would change every single document, freeze her accounts, and report the tampering. This wasn't just emotional warfare. This was attempted theft. And Charlotte wasn't going down easy. By the next morning, Charlotte had already enacted her first line of defense. She summoned Daniel Whitmore, the family's longtime attorney, who had worked with her since her very first property deal. He had retired a few years earlier, but agreed to come out of retirement the moment he heard what had happened. "You're not the first client I've seen targeted by their own children," Daniel said grimly, scanning the photos Tyler had captured. "But you might be the first who's caught them in the act early enough to fight back." Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. "I raised her to be strong, but not like this." Daniel nodded solemnly. "There's a difference between strong and ruthless." What hurt Charlotte the most wasn't the greed. It was the betrayal of trust. She had given Isabella everything: the best schools, the safest home, a childhood filled with privilege and choices. But none of that had built gratitude, only entitlement. Over the following days, Charlotte launched a counteroffensive. She revoked Isabella's access to all medical, legal, and financial records. She switched banks, locked her credit, and hired a forensic accountant to trace unusual transactions linked to Ryan's consulting firm. Tyler, working by her side, uncovered even more fabricated invoices, mysterious wire transfers, and what appeared to be fake clients. The tech startup Isabella and Ryan had pitched was nothing more than a shell, a shiny distraction masking a massive financial fraud. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected stirred in Charlotte resolve. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was reclaiming her voice. She began journaling every detail, every encounter, every suspicious call, every strange email. Not just for the courts, but for herself. For years, Charlotte had poured everything into taking care of others, often at her own expense. She realized now that boundaries weren't a sign of coldness. They were acts of self-respect. She also realized how much she had silenced her instincts. That gnawing feeling in her gut every time Isabella or Ryan sweet-talked her into trust that hadn't been paranoia. That had been wisdom. The clarity sharpened her. She took calls with new confidence. She met with a private investigator without flinching. She confronted her estate planner with assertiveness, not politeness. For the first time in years, Charlotte was fully awake, not just as a mother or businesswoman, but as a human being fighting for her dignity. And something else happened, too. She started seeing Tyler not just as a grandson, but as an anchor, someone who had chosen truth over comfort, someone who reminded her that family didn't always come from bloodlines. It came from loyalty. As legal action loomed, Charlotte knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But she also knew this: she would never again apologize for protecting herself. She had given life, but that didn't mean she owed it to those who sought to destroy hers. Weeks had passed since Charlotte uncovered the betrayal. Her once quiet farmhouse had become a command center, a place of strategy, phone calls, legal meetings, and digital files. Every morning, Tyler arrived promptly at 8:00 a.m. with coffee and a notebook, ready to assist. But one morning, Tyler brought something else: a flyer. It was from a local advocacy group called Silver Guard, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elderly individuals from financial abuse, especially by their own family. "I think you should talk to them," Tyler said gently. "You're not the only one going through this." Charlotte stared at the flyer for a long time. The bold letters read, "Elder Justice is human justice." It struck something deep. Later that week, she met with Eleanor Reyes, the organization's director, a sharp, passionate woman in her 50s who had once been in Charlotte's shoes. Eleanor had lost her inheritance, her home, and even her credit score to a manipulative sibling, but instead of letting it crush her, she had turned her pain into purpose. "You have power, Charlotte," Eleanor said, "but imagine what happens when you use it not just for yourself, but for others like you." That was the spark. With Daniel's legal help, Charlotte filed not only a civil suit against Isabella and Ryan, but also submitted evidence to local and federal authorities. Fraud, forgery, elder coercion, all backed with timelines, documents, and testimony. Her home, once defaced with hate, now displayed a yard sign that read, "Justice begins at home." And then something unexpected happened. Charlotte was invited to speak at a Silver Guard event, where survivors shared their stories. Her hands trembled as she took the podium. But once she began speaking, telling her truth, her pain, her fight, something shifted. The room leaned in. People wept, applauded. One woman even shouted, "You just told my story." That night, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not relief. Purpose. She realized that her voice, polished by decades in real estate, hardened by betrayal, could be a weapon for change. She wasn't just a victim of family fraud. She was a witness, a fighter, a mentor. Soon, the press caught wind of her case. Interviews followed. Her story aired on local television and was picked up by a national morning show. She became a quiet symbol of resistance, a Southern grandmother who stood up to her own daughter and reminded the world that love has limits and self-respect has no age. But the best opportunity wasn't fame or attention. It was the chance to start over. Charlotte partnered with Eleanor and began hosting workshops in local churches, libraries, and senior centers. Tyler built a website for her initiative called Guardians of Dignity. She wasn't just recovering anymore. She was rebuilding, not just her life, but a shield for others, too. It was a crisp fall morning when Charlotte stood in front of the mirror, buttoning her tailored navy blazer. For the first time in years, she felt proud of the woman staring back at her, not because of her wealth or the size of her estate, but because of the battle she'd faced and the woman she had become on the other side. The courtroom hearings were nearing their conclusion. Charlotte had sat through every single proceeding, refusing to miss even a moment. She watched as Isabella avoided her eyes, as Ryan squirmed while the evidence mounted. Charlotte didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her silence held more power than their lies ever could. But the transformation wasn't just external. Charlotte had begun rewriting her will, not out of bitterness, but with clarity. Her legacy wouldn't be measured in square footage or bank statements. It would be measured in values. She donated a portion of her estate to fund a grant for women over 60 starting small businesses. She established a trust for Tyler, not just for helping her, but for standing up for what was right, even when it meant challenging his own parents. Most importantly, she created a foundation under Guardians of Dignity to train financial advisors and caregivers to spot the warning signs of elder exploitation. Charlotte also changed how she lived. She no longer apologized for setting boundaries. She learned to say no without guilt. She spent time with people who valued her wisdom, not just her assets. She took long walks, cooked meals for herself instead of others, and even joined a book club, something she'd never had time for during her business years. Tyler remained close, but not out of obligation. He respected her space, yet showed up without fail every Sunday for coffee and conversation. One afternoon, he asked, "Do you ever miss how things used to be before everything happened?" Charlotte looked out at her garden, where autumn leaves danced in the wind. "No," she said after a moment. "I think, for the first time, I'm living how I was always meant to, with both eyes open." There was pain, yes, but there was peace too. She had once feared growing old alone, but now she realized being alone wasn't the same as being abandoned, and being loved wasn't the same as being respected. Her entire life, Charlotte had built things: homes, businesses, opportunities. But in this season of her life, she was building something far more powerful, a self that could no longer be manipulated, broken, or silenced. She was no longer simply reacting to betrayal. She was rising above it. And in doing so, she had become not just a survivor, but a lighthouse for others, lost in the same storm. The courthouse was silent as the judge read the final verdict. Guilty. Isabella was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for financial fraud and elder coercion. Ryan received 3 years for conspiracy and attempted forgery. Neither offered an apology. Neither showed remorse. But Charlotte didn't need them to. She had come to court not for revenge, but for closure. Outside the courtroom, reporters buzzed with microphones. Charlotte gave a brief statement. "This isn't just about me. It's about every senior who's been silenced, gaslit, or betrayed by the people they trusted most. We deserve more than protection. We deserve respect." That clip would go viral within hours. But for Charlotte, the real triumph came a week later at a small community center in Savannah. She stood in front of 30 seniors, all seated with attentive eyes. Some had stories like hers. Others were only beginning to suspect that something was wrong in their own homes. She shared her journey, not as a millionaire or a businesswoman, but as a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, a survivor. One man in the back wiped tears from his cheeks. An elderly woman whispered, "Thank you for saying what I've never had the courage to admit." And in that moment, Charlotte knew she had found something greater than any courtroom victory, a voice that could echo in the hearts of others. Tyler, now volunteering as the tech director of Guardians of Dignity, had created an online resource hub where seniors could get free legal templates, guides on how to spot financial manipulation, and access to vetted professionals. He had inherited more than just assets. He had inherited his grandmother's fierce integrity. A few months later, Charlotte was honored by the mayor of Savannah with the Civic Courage Award. In her speech, she said simply, "They tried to reduce me to a checkbook, but I am not currency. I am history. I am knowledge. I am love with boundaries, and I will never again let anyone write my story but me." Her words lit up the crowd with a standing ovation. As autumn turned to winter, Charlotte continued her advocacy. But now, it wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about building. She helped pass a state bill to increase protections against elder abuse. She started a podcast called the second season, featuring stories of seniors reclaiming their lives after betrayal. Every Thursday evening, she would sit by her fireplace with a hot cup of chamomile tea, smiling as emails poured in from across the country, thank yous from strangers, invitations to speak, confessions from those still too scared to act. Charlotte never sought to be a symbol. She only wanted peace. But in finding her own voice, she gave thousands of others the courage to find theirs. And as the fire crackled beside her, she whispered quietly to herself, This is the legacy I was meant to leave." There comes a time in life when love must be measured, not by how much we give, but by how much we protect ourselves while giving. Charlotte's story teaches us that unconditional love should never mean unconditional access, especially when it comes to our safety, dignity, and legacy. Even the people closest to us, our own children, can fall into darkness when greed takes root. But betrayal, as painful as it is, can also become a mirror, a chance to examine the boundaries we've set, the values we've lived by, and the courage we have yet to claim. Charlotte didn't just survive manipulation, she transformed through it. She learned that setting limits isn't a rejection of love. It's a declaration of self-worth. And in reclaiming her voice, she helped others find theirs. No matter your age, you are never too old to start over. You are never too old to fight for what is right.